That's right. And that brings us to the second aspect of Claire's testimony, the timeline of events, which is directly related to this ongoing sexual relationship with John. Claire is back to seeing Starkey Swenson regularly as well, which we know from both Claire's testimony as well as what Suzanne Eggert has heard from John. So Claire tells the court that the day before Starkey Swenson's murder, that's Friday, August 12th, she returned home to Nina from a trip to Australia and New Zealand. She'd been traveling for a while, and the next day, August 13, John Andrews comes to see Claire at her home. They sleep together. Claire hopes John will leave the house after they finish, thinking Starkey Swenson may also come by to see her now that she's back in town. But instead, John hangs around drinking beers.
Can you blame him? I mean, honestly, when you hear this story, you just think, wow, Claire Andrews, she's got a pretty active social calendar. So Claire and John are laying in bed, she says, when they think they hear someone outside the house. John, angry, demands for Claire to tell him who's coming to visit her, but the person never comes to the door. They don't see or hear anyone after that, so John stops pressing her on it. Shortly after that, the phone rings. Claire's worried that it could be Starkey calling from a payphone after seeing John's car at her house, so she doesn't answer. She tells the court that John, suspecting that there's a reason she won't answer the phone, becomes so furious that his eyes are blazing. John asks her if she's been trying to get him to leave so Starkey can come over. He accuses her of scheming to see them both and won't let up. Claire tries to calm John down, and eventually Claire says John does leave. Starkey Swenson doesn't come over. In fact, she never hears from him again.
So that pretty much concludes Claire's testimony from the day of the murder. And really, her story for the most part lines up well with what we've heard from Suzanne Eggert. John is at her house, he stays longer than expected, and he eventually leaves in the evening. Starkey Swenson does not make it to Claire's house, at least not that we can confirm. But we do know there's at least a decent chance that he attempted to come by or to reach out by phone, and certainly a chance that he was in the area of Claire's house and the Shattuck Junior High School that night. There is one more bit of information that Claire Andrews provides that helps the state's case against John C. Andrews. It comes from the period of time following the murder.
Despite the obvious turmoil in their relationship, Claire Andrews does not stop seeing John after the night that Starkey Swenson disappears. You have to wonder if Claire at least suspects that John might have been involved in this, just as others in John's life apparently do. But it doesn't seem to bother Claire. Claire tells the court that she and John continue seeing each other and sleeping together in the time after Starkey's gone missing. She says, as you'd expect given the high-profile nature of this case, that the topic was raised on several occasions in their conversations, and that at least twice John responded to her by speculating, somebody probably hit him with a car and hit his body.
To me, this is one of those things that's difficult to sort out in terms of importance. When you first hear it, you think, wow, he's telling her exactly what happened. And maybe that's the case. It's certainly plausible. But to be fair, you also need to consider that Starkey Swenson's disappearance was widely reported in the local news. Many of the stories including the information that he was last seen leaving his house on bike at night. While it without a doubt seems suspicious that John would specifically mention someone killing Swenson with a car and hiding the body, I also can't imagine it's too far from anyone else's best guess either. I mean, a guy heads down the road at night on a bike and is never seen again? I'd probably also speculate someone hit him accidentally, panicked, and hid the remains.
And when we think about Starkey Swenson's activities on the day of his disappearance, we really haven't heard much, at least not in the court hearing. To share that side of the story, the state questions a third individual in the preliminary hearing, Lois Swenson, Starkey's wife. Lois fills in most of the information that was reported at the time that Starkey went missing. She states that she and Starkey had taken the family for a picnic in the afternoon, had arrived home between 8 and 8:30 p.m., and that Starkey had set out on his bike shortly after arriving home. In an unexpected twist, Lois corroborates the statements of Suzanne Eggert and Claire Andrews by testifying to her own knowledge that Starkey Swenson had been having an affair with Claire. Lois tells the court that she was well aware that Starkey had been cheating on her, that she'd known about the affair since the late 1970s.
Lois's statement that she knew of Starkey's dalliances must have sent a shockwave through the courtroom. In fact, nearly every local media outlet led its next broadcasted newspaper with a story broadly touting Lois's knowledge that Starkey was a cheater. And it really was remarkable news. As the attorneys pressed Lois for details, she sat calmly on the witness stand. White pearl earrings to match her blouse and her short-cropped hair, black blazer complementing her houndstooth skirt. She looked very much the quintessential older woman in the mid-1990s. In stark contrast to her prim and proper appearance, Lois was recounting the intimate details of her marriage to Starkey Swenson, details of their own sexual lives, of Starkey's frequent trips to visit Claire Andrews, and of the tension this caused at different points in their marriage. Lois told the court that she first became suspicious of the affair in the late 1970s. She and Starkey often went dancing on their nights out, an activity that brought them in frequent contact with Claire Andrews. Starkey and Claire would somehow always end up dancing together. It got to the point, Lois stated, that on some nights, she would end up sitting alone along the side of the dance floor while Claire and Starkey danced together almost the entire time. The affair became such a thinly veiled secret in their marriage that Lois told the court she on several occasions would drive past Claire's house and see Starkey's car brazenly parked in the driveway. At one point, she said, she even saw Starkey shoveling Claire Andrews' sidewalk as she drove past. Starkey and Lois waved at each other. Lois was asked by one of the attorneys to discuss the strain this placed on their marriage, with Starkey spending so many nights away at Claire's house. Lois replied that, while Starkey did visit Claire several nights a week, he actually never spent the night. Starkey always came home between 10:30 and 11 o'clock p.m.
Yeah, it's sure nice to have some principles while you're out cheating on your wife, I guess.
Yeah, you just can't be out there doing whatever you want, you know?
Yeah, at least not too late at night. So Lois tells the court that over the course of their marriage, Starkey and Claire's affair did create some disagreements, some big and some small. In one of the more noteworthy discussions, Starkey brought up to Lois that he wanted to take a trip to visit New Zealand and Australia. Lois asked him point blank if Claire Andrews would be on the trip, and Starkey equivocated, said that he wasn't going with her, but that she would be there. According to her testimony, Lois then told Starkey that if he went on that trip, she would file for divorce. He decided not to go. The connection doesn't appear to have been made during the court hearing, but I've got to think that this trip to New Zealand and Australia is the very same one that Claire, who of course did go on the trip, returns from on the day before Starkey disappears.
She did mention in her testimony that she'd returned from Australia. I can't imagine she's traveling to the other side of the world all that often, so I'd agree, it's very likely the same trip. So, Lois tells the court she and Starkey had an argument about his desired vacation in Australia, and then he backed down when she'd threatened to file for divorce. But, she says, this isn't the only conversation they've had which led to threats of this nature. Lois and Starkey, in fact, had gotten into an argument during their family picnic on the day Starkey disappeared, and they ended up discussing the current shortcomings in their marriage. The two had even begun speaking about a possible separation. Based on the fact they had just argued at the picnic, as well as Starkey's history of visiting Claire Andrews during the week, Lois is not too surprised when Starkey heads off on his bike on the night of August 13th. She tells the court she does become alarmed, however, when he doesn't return by 10:30, or 11, or even midnight. Lois was worried enough that she even drove past Claire Andrews' house to see if Starkey had simply decided it was about time he spent the night there. But his bike wasn't there. There weren't even any cars there. She says the house was dark. Starkey Swenson, as we know, was never seen again.
So based on the testimony of Suzanne Egger, Claire Andrews, and Lois Swenson, the judge in the preliminary hearing decides that despite the fact that there is no body, there's enough circumstantial evidence to go forward with the trial. The three ladies have shared a pretty cohesive recounting of the events. Their statements provide a plausible motive for the murder, a gripping account of the events that possibly occurred, and an attempt by John C. Andrews to apparently hide evidence and intimidate would-be witnesses. And so armed with these stories, but lacking a body or any physical evidence, the state begins to prepare its case for trial on March 14, 1994. It's that trial and its aftermath and new breaks in the case that we will examine in the next episodes.
Do you want to know more about the Starkey Swenson story? Visit our website at frozentundrapodcast.com and be sure to follow our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube for additional information, behind-the-scenes footage, and more. We will continue to post insider content and updates as this real-time investigation progresses. We'd like to take a moment to thank those who helped us compile information on this case, including the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department,